The rain had been falling for 11 hours by the time I saw a pair of headlights go somewhere. Headlights are never supposed to go. I was driving home from the North Maintenance Yard with a thermos of coffee I'd forgotten to drink, and the bridge over the Callow River was slick and black and shining like something alive. I had checked the expansion joints on that bridge 200 times in my life. I knew every seam of it, every place where the asphalt lifted a quarter inch in August heat, every spot where the guardrail had been replaced after some kid took a curve too fast. So when I saw those lights swing wide and lift, when I saw them tilt up toward the clouds like a boat cresting a wave, my hands knew what was happening before my brain caught up. There was a sound, not a crash exactly, more like a door slamming shut in a house made of metal, and then the lights were gone, and there was only the rain and the river and my own truck, stopped crooked on the shoulder with the wipers still going. I don't remember taking off my jacket. I remember the cold. I remember hitting that water and feeling my whole chest lock up like a fist, and thinking, in a voice that sounded strangely calm, that a man has about 10 minutes in November water before his hands stop working. 10 minutes, and then you're just wait. The car had gone in nose first and rolled, and it sat maybe 15 feet out, with the current pushing at it, and the only part still above the surface was one corner of the trunk, and there was a hand pressed flat against the inside of the rear window. Just a hand, fingers spread, slapping the glass in a rhythm that was already slowing down. I've told this part 4 times in my life and never once gotten the order right, because the order didn't exist. There was glass, my elbow going through it, a seatbelt that would not release, and then did. The taste of river water, which is like pennies in cold soil, and a woman's arm around my neck so tight I couldn't turn my head. Then the bank, and the mud, and me dragging her up out of the shallows with my knees giving out under me, and her coughing, and me rolling her onto her side while my hands shook so badly I could barely hold her shoulder. Her hair was plastered across her face. There was blood coming from her hairline, thinned out by the rain into something pink and almost pretty, running down along her jaw. She coughed again, hard, and turned her head, and the hair moved off her face, and I stopped breathing, because I knew that face. I had known that face since I was 26 years old. I had known it in kitchen light and in car light and in the blue dark of 4 in the morning. I had spent 7 years telling myself I had made most of it up, that memory does what it wants with people who leave, that no one is as beautiful as the person you lost. And there it was, 6 inches from mine, with a cut over the left eyebrow and river water running out of the corner of her mouth. "Addie," I said. Her eyes came open. They didn't focus at first. They rolled a little, the way a person's eyes do when the world is still shifting. Then they found me, and I watched something happen in her face that I have never been able to describe properly to anyone, because it was not relief. It was not gratitude. It was the look of a woman who has been holding one door closed for 7 years, and just felt it come off its hinges. Her lips moved. Almost nothing came out. "You weren't supposed to find me." Then her eyes rolled back, and she went slack in my arms. And somewhere behind me on the bridge a car horn started up, and a man was shouting, and blue lights came sliding across the water. And I sat in the mud with her head on my thigh saying her name over and over like it was a thing that could hold her here. But let me take you back, because none of that means anything unless you understand what I lost the first time. Her name was Adeline Voss. Not Ray, not Winters, Adeline Voss, and she hated the Adeline part. So everyone she liked called her Addie, and everyone she didn't got the whole thing. I met her at a hardware store in the spring. I turned 26. I was buying a hinge. She was standing in the plumbing aisle holding 2 lengths of pipe like a woman about to make a bad decision. And she looked at me and said, "You look like somebody who knows what a compression fitting is." And I said I did. And she said, "Good, because my landlord's a coward." And that was it. That was the whole beginning. 30 seconds in an aisle that smelled like sawdust and rubber. We had 3 years. And I want to be careful, because it would be easy to make those 3 years sound like a highlight reel. We fought about money. She left cabinet doors open, every single one, like a woman raised by ghosts who don't need doors. I got quiet when I should have talked, which is a thing men in my family do, the way other families pass down a limp. But God, we were good. She used to sit on the counter while I cooked, bare feet swinging, telling me about people at her job like they were characters in a serial she was inventing as she went. She worked dispatch and billing at a freight company out on the county road, and she was better at it than the job deserved. The last normal thing she ever said to me was about a light bulb. The one over the back steps had gone out, and she said she'd get one at lunch. And I said, "Don't worry, I'll grab it." And she said, "You always say that, and then it's dark for a week." She laughed. She kissed the side of my head. I was half asleep. That's the part I'd change if I got to change one thing. I'd wake up all the way. 3 days later, I came home from a shift and the house was too clean. That was the first thing. The counters were wiped. The cabinet doors were all shut. Every single one. And on the kitchen table, lined up neat as a place setting, were her keys. House key, car key, the little brass one to the shed, and the ring with the enamel bird on it that her grandmother gave her. No note, no suitcase gone, or almost none. Her clothes were mostly there, her toothbrush was there, her coffee cup was in the drying rack upside down. I did all the things. I called her phone until it stopped ringing and started going straight to nothing. I called her work and they said she'd resigned by email that morning. And the woman on the phone said it in a tight, strange voice I didn't understand for 7 years. I filed a report and sat across from a deputy named Hollis, who I'd known since we were 8 and who now had to write my whole life down on a form. I drove for 2 weeks. I put up flyers like she was a dog. And then, at the end of the 3rd month, Hollis came by with 2 beers and sat on my back steps under a light bulb I still hadn't replaced, and told me the truth as it appeared from the outside. There was no sign of a struggle. Her car had been found in long-term parking at the airport in Marlow. She had made a bank withdrawal, and no law in this country requires a grown woman to stay. She left, Wes, he said. I'm sorry, but she left. And that's what I believed for 7 years. And I built a whole man on top of it. I kept the house. I kept the job. I got very good at bridges, which are structures designed to hold a load that never stops moving. I dated a little. A kind woman named Priya lasted 4 months and told me on her way out that I was a house with the power still on and nobody home. She wasn't wrong. I never did replace the bulb over the back steps. 7 years. Some men build shrines out of their grief and call it loyalty. I know what it was, so when I say I knew that face in the mud, I need you to hear all of that behind it. 7 years of certainty. And it came apart in the time it takes a woman to cough. Up half a river, the ambulance ride was 18 minutes, and I don't remember any of it except a paramedic telling me over and over to put a blanket around my own shoulders. At the hospital in Marlow, they took her one way and put me in a curtained bay, and a resident who looked about 19 stitched 3 places on my forearm where the window had opened me up. 11 stitches. I didn't feel a single one. I kept looking at the curtain like it owed me something. Is she alive? I said. Maybe 4 times. She's alive, the resident said. Finally, on the 4th, that's all I can tell you, because you're not family. Are you family? And there it was. The first turn of the screw? No, I said. I don't know what I am. They kept her 2 nights, and those 2 nights are where this story actually lives. Anybody can jump in a river. Cold water makes heroes out of ordinary men for about 90 seconds. What came after was harder. 3rd floor, room 314, second bed by the window, a curtain track that squeaked, a hairline fracture in her left wrist, 9 stitches above her left eyebrow, a mild concussion, and what they called aspiration, which is a polite word for the fact that she'd had river in her lungs. Oxygen, the first night. The bruise came up along her cheekbone, the way bruises do, taking its time, gone that awful green-purple by the 2nd morning. I did not leave. There was a vinyl chair, the color of an old bandage, and I sat in it. A nurse brought me a blanket from a warmer around 2 in the morning, and I said thank you, and she said, "You're the one who went in," and I said yes. And she looked at me for a second longer than she needed to, and then went away. Addie woke up a little past 4. I knew because the pattern of her breathing changed. It's amazing what you remember about a person's breathing. The room was dark, except for the light. Under the door, and the little green reed, she turned her head on the pillow, slow, careful, and looked at me sitting there with a hospital blanket over my knees and 11 stitches in my arm, and my hair still stiff from the river. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. This is the part where, in a movie, somebody says something enormous. We didn't, we just looked at each other across 8 feet and 7 years. Then she said, "Your arm, it's fine. You went in after me. Yeah, you could have died in there." Her voice was wrecked, all the way down, a whisper made of gravel. "Wesley, you could have died in there." "So could you," I said. "You were in there already." Her chin moved, not a nod, something smaller. Her eyes were wet and she blinked it back the way she always used to. Angry about it, like tears were a rude guess, and I asked the only question I had. Just one. I'd had 4 hours in that chair to build 100 of them, and they'd all burned off, except this one. "Addie, where have you been?" She looked at the ceiling for a while. The oxygen made a small sound in the tubing. Out in the hall, a cart went by with a bad wheel. "Don't call me that," she said. "Not here." I sat forward. "Please." And then she turned her face away, toward the window, toward the black glass with the rain still on it, and she said, "Not here, Wesley." That was it. That was everything I got. That first night. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I can explain." Just a woman I had buried in my chest for 7 years telling me not to say her name out loud in a hospital room. I should have pushed. Anybody would tell you I should have pushed. But there was something in the way she said it. Not embarrassed. Not ashamed. Careful. The way you'd say, "Don't step there," to somebody walking across a frozen pond. So I sat back in that ugly chair and said, "Okay." And she cried without making any sound at all. And I sat there with my hands open on my knees and didn't touch her because I didn't have the right. And because I was afraid that if I did, she'd be gone again by morning. The first day was quiet in the way hospitals are quiet, which is not quiet at all. People came in and out. A doctor with reading glasses pushed up on her head, used the word lucky twice. A man from the county came to ask about the accident, and I stood in the hallway while he did it. And through the gap in the door, I heard her say that a deer had come out of the tree line at the north end of the bridge, that she'd braked and the back end had come around on the wet deck, that she'd hit the rail going sideways. She said it flat and clear, the way you say a thing that's true. He asked what she was doing on that road at 10:30 on a Tuesday night in November, and there was a pause about 2 seconds long, and then she said she'd taken a wrong turn. And he wrote that down and thanked her and left a wrong turn, on a bridge she would have had to cross on purpose. I noticed the name on the second morning. It was on the whiteboard by the door, in blue marker, and a nurse's round handwriting. Our winters I stood there with a cup of coffee from the machine in the family lounge, and read those 2 words maybe 15 times. And here's the thing I want to be honest about, because this is where a lot of men would tell you they felt betrayed. I didn't. What I felt was much stranger and much worse. I felt a door open under my feet, because a person doesn't change their name for fun. A person changes their name for exactly one reason, and it isn't shame, and it isn't a new start. It's because the old one can be found. Her nurse that morning was Tess Ardley, who'd gone to high school 2 years ahead of me and had the flat, unbothered warmth of somebody who has seen every possible thing a human body can do. She was hanging a new bag when I came in. "You're still here," she said. "I'm still here. You should eat something that isn't from a machine." Then she looked at the chart, and then at me, and she said, in the exact tone you'd use to comment on the weather, "You wouldn't happen to know who we're supposed to call for her, would you? There's nobody in the file. No emergency contact, no next of kin, no primary. In this day and age, it's like she fell out of the sky." "No," I said. "I don't know." "Well," Tess snapped the port shut. "She had you when she was gone." I sat down and looked at Addie, sleeping with her wrist in a splint on top of the blanket and her hair drying in a dark tangle on the pillow. And I did the thing I am least proud of in this entire story. On the shelf under the window there was a plastic bag with patient belongings printed on it, and inside it was her wallet, still swollen and dark from the river, the leather gone soft as bread. I opened it. Behind the little clear window there was a driver's license. Ray Annette Winters. An address on Sumner Street in Halloway, the town on the other side of the river. 31 years old, which was right. And behind it, in the slot underneath, warped and waterlogged and long expired, was another one. Adeline M. Voss. My address. Our address. The house with the burned-out bulb over the back steps. She'd kept it 7 years, and she had carried the old one behind the new one, close enough to touch, where you'd have to take out the false thing to get to the true thing. I put the wallet back in the bag and folded the bag closed and went out into the hall and stood, with my forehead against the cool, painted cinder block for about a minute and a half. Hollis came by that afternoon in uniform, because in a town this size the man who took your missing person report 7 years ago is also the man who catches the call about a car in the river. He stood at the end of the bed with his hat in his hands and looked at her a long time. She was awake. Neither of them said anything. "Out in the corridor," he said. That's her, Wes." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I sat on your steps and told you she left. She did leave, you know what I mean?" He glanced back at the door. "Is she in trouble?" "I don't know. You want me to run the name on the license?" And I thought about it. I want to be truthful about that too. For about 3 seconds I wanted to hand the whole thing to somebody with a badge and a computer and let it be their problem. Then I thought about the way she'd said, "Not here. Careful, like ice." "No," I said, "not yet. Give me a week." Hollis looked at me the way he'd looked at me at 15 when I said I could make the jump on my bike. "A week," he said, "and then you tell me." They discharged her at 11 the next morning. That's when the second problem showed up, and it showed up quietly, in the form of a discharge nurse, asking a completely ordinary question. "Who's picking you up, and who's going to be at home with you for the next 7 days? Because with that concussion, you can't be alone." Addie sat on the edge of the bed in a paper gown with her clothes in a bag, because her clothes had been cut off her, and she said, "I'll be fine." "That's not one of the options. Hun, I live alone." "Then we can look at a short-term rehab placement," the nurse said. "Or you can give me a name." And she didn't have one. That's the moment I understood what 7 years of hiding actually costs. Not the money, not the name, not the town. It costs you the ability to answer that question. She sat there with her wrist in a splint and her eye going purple, and she could not produce one single human being on earth who would come and sit in a house with her. "Me," I said. "She's coming with me." Her head came up fast. "Wesley, you can argue with me in the truck." She didn't argue with me in the truck. That's the part I remember. She sat in the passenger seat with the bag of ruined clothes in her lap and her knees together, and watched the road like a woman being driven somewhere she'd sworn never to go. And when we came off the highway and turned onto Bell Road, she made a sound. Not a word. Just a small intake of breath. Because the maple at the corner of the yard had gotten huge, and because everything else was exactly the same, I pulled into the drive. I shut the engine off. The rain had finally quit and everything was dripping. "You didn't move," she said. "No. 7 years and you didn't move." Where was I going to go? Addie. She looked at the back steps then. At the fixture over the door with nothing in it, because I'd never put in a bulb. And there was still an empty socket 7 years later in a house with a man in it who fixed things. Professionally. She put her good hand over her mouth and turned her face to the window, and I got out and came. Arondon opened her door and helped her down, and she leaned on me all the way up the walk, and she was so light. That's what got me. She'd always been small, but there was nothing to her now. like she'd been living on very little for a very long time. The first 2 days at the house we barely spoke, and it was the most peaceful I had felt in 7 years. Which tells you something about me. I gave her the bedroom. I took the couch, and every night at some point I'd hear her get up, and the floor would creak in the hall, and she'd stand in the kitchen doorway for a while looking at nothing, and then go back. I made soup because it was the only thing I could think of, chicken and rice out of a pot the size of a bucket, and she ate it slowly and thoroughly, like somebody who has learned that food is not guaranteed. I set the pills out on a saucer with the times written on a scrap of paper, because concussions make you forget, and every time she found that saucer she'd look at it, then at me, then take them without a word. The first night she said, almost apologetically, that she couldn't sleep in complete dark anymore. I didn't ask why. I drove to town and bought a $9 lamp with a fabric shade and set it on the nightstand and left the room. And I noticed things. She kept the curtains closed. All of them, all the time. And if I opened one to let the afternoon in, she'd wait about 10 minutes and then close it. Casually, on her way past, like a woman straightening a picture, she wouldn't sit with her back to the door. At my own table, she took the chair against the wall where she could see the porch. Every time, and if I sat there first, she stood at the counter instead. Her phone was a cheap prepaid thing that stayed face down and never once rang. On the 4th day, a car came down Bell Road slow, the way people do when they're reading mailbox numbers, and she was on her feet and out of that chair before I even registered the sound of the engine, and she was standing flat against the wall in the hallway where the window couldn't see her, breathing hard, with her splinted wrist held against her chest like a bird. That it was the propane company. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen and watched her realize it, and watched the shame come up her neck in a hot red wave, and watched her walk very carefully back to the table and sit down and put her hands flat on the wood. Addie, don't. 7 years ago you disappeared and I thought you were dead, and then I thought you'd left me, and then I got used to it, which was worse. My voice did something in the middle of that sentence that I wasn't expecting. I have been sitting in this house for 4 days, making you soup and not asking, but I just watched you hide from a propane truck. So I'm going to ask, tonight, when you're ready, I'm going to ask. And you can tell me to go to hell, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life not knowing. She looked at her hands on the table for a long time. Tonight, she said. She waited until after dark. She waited until the dishes were done and the house had gone quiet the way old houses do, settling into themselves, and then she sat down at the kitchen table in the chair against the wall and said, "Turn off the overhead, just the little one." So I turned off the overhead and switched on the lamp over the stove, and the kitchen went the color of weak tea, and I sat down across from her. "You know I worked at Meridian Freight," she said. Dispatch and billing, dispatch and billing." She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn. "In August of that year I was cleaning up a billing discrepancy on a route that came up out of Kentucky, and there were 3 manifests that didn't match the weights, and I did what anybody would do. I pulled the file to fix it. Another quarter turn. And the file was wrong on purpose, Wesley. Everything about it was wrong on purpose. And I was good at my job, so I could see exactly how, and how long it had been happening, and whose initials were on all of it." "Who's the man who owned the company?" she said. "Corbin Lasky." I'd heard the name. Everybody had. He owned the freight yard and a car wash and 2 buildings on 3rd Street. He sponsored the high school baseball team, and he shook your hand with both of his. "I sat on it for 9 days, she said. 9 days. And then I made copies. And then I drove to Marlow, and I gave them to a woman in a federal office, who had asked me 3 questions, and already knew the answers to all of them. They'd been working on him for 2 years. What they didn't have was somebody inside who could explain the paperwork to a jury." Her eyes came up to mine. "That was the last normal week of my life. I remember standing in our kitchen making a grocery list and thinking, in 6 months this'll be over, and I'll tell him the whole thing, and he'll be so proud of me." "Then why?" "Because 11 days later, a man came to the office at closing," she said, "and he sat on the edge of my desk. And he was very polite, and he asked me how you were. By name. He asked me whether you were still working the North Bridge crew. He asked whether that was a hard job in winter." She had gone completely still. "He never threatened me, Wesley, not one word you could write down. He just wanted me to know that he knew what I loved and exactly where to find it." The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere out in the dark, a dog was barking at nothing. "I called the woman in Marlow that night from a gas station," she said, "and she told me what my choices were, and there were 2. Stay and testify and be protected, which meant a program, which meant leaving everything with no contact, no calls, no goodbyes, nothing. Because the whole point is that nobody can follow the thread back to you, or refuse to testify, in which case he walks, and he knows I gave them the copies, and I stay here with you in this house and wait. You could have told me. We could have gone together. Together." Something broke open in her face. "You can't go together. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? If I bring you, you're the thread. Your mother was still alive then. Your job, your name, Hollis, this house. He'd have found me through you inside a year, and I'd have brought him right to your door. The only version of this where you are safe is the version where I am gone, and it looks like I left. So I made it look like I left. I cleaned the counters. I shut the cabinet doors because you always said it drove you crazy, and I thought, She stopped and pressed her wrist against her mouth. I thought if it looked deliberate, you'd be angry instead of afraid. Angry heals. I gave you angry, on purpose. I sat there with my hands flat on the table in my own kitchen, and I could not speak. I testified in March, she said. It took 4 days. He got 11 years. And I sat in a room in Ohio with a name that wasn't mine, and no way to send you one line to tell you I was alive. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, quick, irritated, and then I did something they told me not to do. What? I left the program. 6 months in, signed the papers, walked out, took the name because the name was legally mine now, and it was the only thing they let me keep. She looked up at me, and then I came back. Backward? Halloway, she said. It took a second. Halloway. Halloway is across the river. Halloway is the little brick town with the library and the bakery and the boat ramp. You can see the water tower from the top of the North Bridge. Halloway, I said. That's Addie. That's 40 minutes. 26, she said. If the light on Ashby is green, and I made a sound I have never made before or since. 7 years. 7 years. Her voice went to nothing. I worked in the archive at the library. I lived in a second-floor apartment over a dentist's office, and every few months I'd drive over the bridge at night. And I would come down Bell Road, and I would slow down. And there was never a light on over your back steps, and I used to sit at the end of the street and try to decide if that was a good sign or a bad one. She laughed. One awful cracked note. That's where I was going on Tuesday. I wasn't taking a wrong turn. Lasky got out in September. Wesley, 8 years served of 11. I found out 3 weeks ago and I have not slept since. And on Tuesday I got in the car to come here and tell you to be careful. And I got halfway across the bridge and lost my nerve. And I was turning around at the north end when the deer came out. She looked at the table. You want to know why I said what I said in the mud? Because I have spent 7 years keeping you out of this. And then I opened my eyes, and there you were with your arm cut open and river water on your face, and I thought, it's done. Every single thing I gave up, it's done. He'll know inside a week. How would he know? And she said, because the man who pulls a woman out of the Callow River gets his picture in the county paper. I got up and went to the drawer where I keep the mail I haven't dealt with. And under the electric bill was the Marlowe Register from Thursday. And on page 3 was a photograph of my truck on the bridge shoulder with its door open, a caption with my name in it, and one sentence saying, a Halloway woman, our Winters 31, had been treated and released. I set it on the table in front of her. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then she put her hand out, palm up, on the wood, just left it there. And I put mine in it, and she closed her fingers. And that was the first time either of us had touched the other on purpose in 7 years. And I felt every single one of those years go through my chest like weather. I'm not going to run again, she said. I don't have another name in me. Good, I said, because I'm not letting you. Here's what happened, and it happened faster than either of us expected. And it was smaller and uglier than anything I'd imagined in that kitchen. I called Hollis at 7 the next morning and told him everything. All of it, on my own back steps with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. And he listened without writing anything down. And at the end of it, he said one word. Okay? Then he made 3 phone calls. One to a woman in the federal office in Marlowe, whose name Addie still remembered. One to his sergeant. And one, I found out later, to a friend of his who runs the towing outfit on the county road, asking him to mention it around the heart. Place had people at it, day and night now, because that's how it works in a town this size. Not sirens. Word. On Sunday afternoon, a gray sedan came down Bell Road and stopped in front of the mailbox and sat there with the engine running for 1 minute and 10 seconds. I know the time because Hollis's cruiser was parked in my driveway in plain sight, and Hollis was standing in my open front door with a cup of my coffee in his hand. And he looked at his watch when the car stopped, and looked at it again when it pulled away. Addie was standing behind me in the hall. She didn't hide this time. That's the thing I'll carry. She came and stood in the doorway with her wrist in its splint and let herself be seen. He didn't come back. Men like Corbin Lasky are not brave. They're patient. And patience only works on people who are alone. 11 days later, he was picked up in Marlowe County on a parole violation that had nothing to do with us. Contact with a co-defendant, a bar, a phone call, something small and stupid and entirely his own fault. And he went back inside to finish the 3 years he'd been given as a gift. Men like that almost never fall from the top. They trip over their own feet on flat ground. That's the whole action of it. A car idling by a mailbox for 70 seconds, and a woman standing in a doorway on purpose. The rest of it isn't dramatic. She stayed, not all at once. She kept the apartment over the dentist's office until spring, because 7 years of running does not come out of a person in a month. And there were nights she woke up gasping and I learned not to reach for her until she said my name first. She was 31 and cautious. I was 34 and had forgotten how to be looked at. I would not describe a single week of it as easy, but in April she started using her own name again, out loud, in front of people, and I watched her flinch, and then stop flinching. And in May, the county finished the rail replacement on the North Bridge, and my crew put the last bolt in. And I drove her out there at dusk to see it, because I am a man whose romantic gestures are structural. We stood at the north end where the deer had come out. The water down there was brown and ordinary, and about 9 feet deep, and completely uninterested in us. She had her arms crossed on the new rail, and the wind was moving her hair around, and she said, "You know what I think about?" "What? That you'd checked those expansion joints 200 times?" She kept looking at the water. Of all the bridges, of all the men on all the roads that night, the one who came off the shoulder was the one who already knew every inch of it. I didn't have anything smart to say to that. I never do. So I took her hand and turned it over and put a light bulb in it. 60-watt, soft white, out of a 2-pack from the hardware store where a woman once asked me if I knew what a compression fitting was. She looked down at it in her palm for a second, then she started to laugh, and then she wasn't laughing. And she pressed her forehead into my shoulder and held that bulb against my back with her good hand, and out on the water the light was going the color of the inside of a shell. "I'm home," she said, and I said, "You've been 26 minutes away for 7 years. Addie, come inside. It's dark on the back steps."